The silence in the Brooklyn brownstone had become a heavy cloak since Michael was gone. Night stretched, each tick of the antique clock in the hall a hammer blow against the quiet. Wine, a book, props really, and the clock were my only companions. Then David moved into the garden apartment a few weeks ago, and the silence shifted. His footsteps on the patio stones, a burst of laughter from a call. These faint sounds breathed a fragile life back into the place. But there was something else too, something unexpected. David wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man, and I hadn't seen it coming. Broad shoulders filled out his shirts, a confident line to his smile, a world away from the gangly kid who used to raid the fridge for pizza rolls. 28 now, a raw energy thrummed around him, a pull I hadn't felt in years. It was unsettling, this man emerging from the boy I remembered. The air hung thick, a pre-storm stillness that never broke. Restlessness had been a constant companion all day, a jittery hum beneath my skin. I'd tried to tidy, to distract, but nothing worked. Finally, exhausted and wired, I went upstairs. Tank top and shorts, the cool cotton a brief comfort against the humid air. Brushing my hair, the faint living room glow caught in the mirror. Curtains. Forgotten again. No big deal. The brownstone sat deep in the block, the garden sprawling between my place and the garden apartment where David was staying. No one around for blocks. But as I descended the stairs, a prickle at the edge of my awareness made me pause. At the window, I froze. Through the sheer curtains, across the shadowed yard, light spilled from David's apartment. Blinds up just enough, revealing him at the small desk by the window, laptop casting a blue light on his face, lost in whatever held his attention. I should have turned away, closed the curtains, and vanished upstairs. But I didn't. Then he looked up. Our eyes met, the distance doing nothing to soften the impact of his gaze. I was rooted, caught in the sudden intensity of his stare. No embarrassment, no surprise in his expression. Something else. Something I couldn't name, but felt like a tightening in my chest. The spell broke when I reached for the curtains, my hand trembling slightly as I yanked them closed. Breath coming too fast, too shallow. What had I been thinking? Standing there, watching him, letting him watch me. Ridiculous. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to slow my racing heart. It meant nothing, just a fleeting, accidental glance. But as I climbed the stairs, slipped into bed, the image burned behind my eyelids. His eyes, the way they lingered, the sudden heat that had flared within me. Imagination, I told myself, reading too much into nothing. But deep down, a tremor of something real had shifted, and I knew it. Morning light, sharp and bright, sliced across the kitchen counter. Pancakes, a mindless routine honed over years. Coffee filled the air, rich and familiar, but did little to settle the unease simmering since last night. Every time I closed my eyes, David's face bathed in blue light, his gaze locked on mine through the open curtains. Unsettling, intense, and I couldn't quite name why. The back door creaked open, pulling me from the fog of my thoughts. David stepped into the kitchen, hair still wet from the shower, jeans clinging to his lean frame, a plain white t-shirt stretched across his chest. "Morning," he said, his voice warm, easy. "Morning," I replied, glancing over my shoulder. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Pancakes, huh? Someone's in a good mood." A soft laugh escaped me, brittle, forced. Just what was in the fridge? David raised an eyebrow, smile widening. "You say that like I didn't see the mountain of frozen waffles last week." "Fine," I admitted, shaking my head. "Maybe I felt like cooking." "Lucky me," he teased, grabbing a mug from the cabinet, pouring himself coffee. I focused on the pancakes, flipping the last one onto a plate, setting everything on the small kitchen table. David was already there, long legs stretched out under the table. "Dig in," I said, sliding the plate towards him. He didn't hesitate, grabbing a pancake, drowning it in syrup. "You know," he said between bites, "I could get used to this." "This?" I asked, sitting across from him. "This?" He gestured to the plate. "Real breakfast. Someone to talk to in the morning." I frowned slightly, his words catching me off guard. "You didn't have that before?" David shrugged, his expression turning thoughtful. "Not really. Living alone, it's easy to fall into bad habits. Granola bar on the run, takeout at midnight. Doesn't sound very sustainable," I said softly. "Wasn't," he admitted, his gaze meeting mine. "That's part of why I came back." I hesitated, fork poised above my plate. "A reset something?" "Something like that," he said, his tone quieter now. "Needed a change, and honestly, I missed this place. Missed you." His words landed heavier than I expected, a tightness in my chest. It's good to have you here, I said softly. David's eyes lingered on mine for a moment before he looked away, a faint smile playing on his lips. So, he said, changing the subject, what's on the agenda today? Just the usual, I replied, grateful for the shift. Some cleaning, a little gardening, nothing exciting. Gardening, huh? He said, leaning back in his chair. Mind if I help? I blinked, caught off guard again. You want to help with gardening? Why not? He shrugged. Could use the fresh air. Fair warning, I said, smiling despite myself. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Mostly pulling weeds and hauling mulch. I'll take my chances, he said, his grin teasing. By the time we finished breakfast, the tension from the night before had eased, replaced by the easy rhythm of our conversation. But as David carried the dishes to the sink, rolling up his sleeves to help me wash, I couldn't ignore the subtle current between us. His arm brushed against mine as we stood side by side, the warmth of his presence lingering even after he stepped away. Watching him laugh at a joke I barely remembered telling, something stirred deep within me. Unease, yes, but also something like exhilaration, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge in years. And for the first time, a question flickered in my mind. Was I ready to face what that meant? The garden was a jungle, overgrown and wild, years of neglect taking their toll. Michael's sanctuary, his pride and joy, meticulously tended. After he was gone, I couldn't bring myself to step foot in it. When I finally did, the tangled vines and choking weeds felt like a mirror of my own grief, something beautiful left to decay. Standing there with David, gardening gloves in one hand, trowel in the other, I wasn't sure I was ready to face it, or him, in this space. This is a lot, David said, hands on his hips, surveying the chaos. A soft laugh escaped me. Told you it wasn't glamorous. Glamorous isn't the word I'd use, he said, grinning, but I like a challenge. I handed him gloves, nodding towards the far corner. If you're serious, start over there. Those weeds have been mocking me for months. Yes, ma'am, he said with a mock salute, pulling on the gloves, grabbing a spade. I watched him for a moment, kneeling, getting to work, broad shoulders flexing with the effort of pulling stubborn roots. Sunlight caught in his hair, highlighting streaks of gold I hadn't noticed before. A strange pang, something unfamiliar, tightened in my chest. Shaking myself, I turned back to my own section, determined to focus on the task at hand. We worked in a companionable silence, the rustle of leaves. David's occasional grunt as he wrestled with particularly tenacious weeds, the only sounds. The sun climbed, the day's heat settling over us like a blanket. Hey, David called after a while, breaking the quiet. What's this thing? I looked up, saw him holding a small, rusted garden ornament. A metal bird, once bright, now faded and worn. A cardinal, I said, walking over. It was Michael's favorite. Dad's favorite, he corrected, his voice softer. He said it reminded him of his mother. David turned the ornament in his hands, thoughtful. Funny, he said softly. I don't remember this. He got it a few years before, my voice trailed off. He used to joke it was watching over the garden for him. David smiled faintly, his thumb brushing against the faded paint. Guess we should put it back where it belongs, huh? I nodded, chest tight, watching as he carried it to a nearby flower bed, staking it into the ground. By midday, we were both coated in dirt and sweat, arms aching from hours of pulling weeds and hauling mulch. But the garden was changing, chaos slowly yielding to order. We collapsed onto the edge of the patio for a break, a pitcher of lemonade between us. David leaned back on his elbows, face tilted to the sun, and I couldn't help but steal a glance at him. You've got dirt on your face, I said, smiling despite myself. He grinned, wiping at his cheek. Better. Not even close, I said, laughing. David leaned forward, grabbed the edge of his t-shirt to wipe his face, the movement exposing a sliver of his stomach, lean muscle catching the light. My breath hitched, and I quickly looked away. Better now? He asked, voice teasing. Much, I said, forcing myself to focus on the lemonade in my hands. David watched me for a moment, expression unreadable. You know, he said softly, this is the most I've seen you smile in weeks. I glanced at him, startled by the shift in tone. What do you mean? I just mean... He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. It's nice to see you happy. You've been through a lot, and I know it hasn't been easy. The sincerity in his voice, the quiet warmth in his gaze made my chest ache. Thank you, I said softly, voice trembling slightly. David smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. You don't have to thank me, he said. I just want you to know I'm here. We finished the day replanting flower beds, the once wild garden now a place full of possibility. As we stood back, admiring our work, David let out a low whistle. Not bad, he said, grinning. Not bad at all, I agreed, heart lighter than it had been in a long time. He turned to me, smile softening. Thanks for letting me help. I know this place means a lot to you. It does, I said quietly, but I think it's starting to mean a lot to you too. David didn't reply right away, gaze lingering on mine. Maybe, he said finally, voice low. The air between us felt still, charged. For a moment, I thought he might say more, but then he stepped back, his hand brushing lightly against mine as he turned towards the garden apartment. See you at dinner? He asked, voice casual, as if nothing had changed. Yeah, I said, voice softer than I intended. See you then. But as I watched him walk away, his figure framed by the fading light, I knew something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore. Night settled over the brownstone, a deep, almost tangible stillness. Garden lights cast a soft glow across the yard, the faint hum of crickets filling the silence. I sat on the porch swing, blanket draped over my lap, wine glass cradled in my hands. The day had left me physically drained, but my mind raced. David, his easy laugh, the brush of his hand, the lingering warmth of his presence. The creak of porch steps broke through my thoughts. David stood there, hands tucked in his jeans pockets. Couldn't sleep? I asked, voice softer than I meant. He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Not really. Thought I'd see if you were still up. I'm always up, I said with a soft laugh, gesturing to the empty seat beside me. He hesitated only a moment before crossing the porch, settling onto the swing, long legs stretched out in front of him. For a while, neither of us spoke. The swing swayed gently, the quiet between us comfortable yet charged. Today was nice, David said eventually, voice breaking the silence. It was, I agreed, taking a sip of wine. The garden hasn't looked that good in years. It's more than that, he said, tone thoughtful. It felt good, working side by side with you talking. I don't know, it's been a while since I felt like that. Like what? I asked, glancing at him. David leaned forward, elbows on knees, staring out into the yard. Like I belonged somewhere, he said softly. His words struck something deep within me, a familiar ache. You've always belonged here, I said, voice trembling slightly. Maybe, he said, gaze flicking to mine, but it feels different now. The weight of his words hung in the air, and I wasn't sure how to respond. I shifted on the swing, hands tightening around the glass. I didn't realize you felt that way, I said after a moment. David turned to me, expression unreadable. You make it easy, he said quietly. Make what easy? Being here, he said, voice soft. Talking to you, spending time with you, it feels right. My breath hitched, and I looked away, chest tightening. David, I don't know. You don't have to say anything, he said gently, cutting me off. I just wanted you to know. The quiet conviction in his voice, the sincerity in his gaze, it was too much. A tear slipped down my cheek, and I quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I said softly, voice breaking. Don't be, David said, his hand moving to cover mine. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. You don't have to apologize for how you feel. I don't know what I feel, I admitted, voice barely a whisper. David's fingers tightened slightly around mine. That's okay, he said. We don't have to figure it all out right now. His words, his touch, calmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I looked at him then, heart pounding, and for the first time, let myself really see him. Not Michael's son, but the man beside me, offering comfort, understanding. David, I began, but didn't know how to finish. You can tell me, he said softly, his gaze steady. I took a shaky breath, hands trembling in my lap. I'm scared, I admitted, the words tumbling out. I know, he said quietly. I don't want to hurt you, I said, voice breaking, or ruin this, whatever this is. You're not going to hurt me, David said firmly. And this doesn't have to be anything more than what it is right now. His calm reassurance, the quiet strength in his voice was enough to make my chest ache. I don't know how to do this, I said softly, eyes filling with tears. You don't have to know, David said, hand lifting to brush a tear from my cheek. We'll figure it out together. The tenderness in his touch, the quiet certainty in his voice unraveled me completely. I leaned into him, head resting against his shoulder as the swing swayed gently beneath us. David's arm slid around me, holding me close, and for the first time in years I felt the weight of my loneliness begin to lift. We sat there in silence, the night wrapping around us like a cocoon. For the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face everything alone. The next day unfolded slowly, lazy summer mornings stretching long. I lingered over coffee, staring out at the garden we'd worked on, flowers standing tall, colors vibrant in the morning light, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Last night. David's gaze, his voice, those simple, grounding words, the weight of his arm around me, reassurance. But the reality of it, the truth of what was brewing between us, tightened my chest. How to move forward. Lost in thought, David walked into the kitchen, steps light but purposeful, white t-shirt, athletic shorts, hair tousled as if he'd just come back from a run. "Morning," he said, voice warm, as if nothing about last night had changed. "Morning," I replied, forcing a small smile. He poured coffee, the clink of spoon against mug filling the quiet, leaning against the counter, gaze flicking to me. "You okay?" he asked, tone casual but probing. "Fine," I said too quickly. "Just thinking about—" I hesitated, fingers tightening around my mug. "The garden," I lied. "Coming along nicely." David smiled, eyes softening. "It is. You should be proud. You did most of the work." "I didn't mind," he shrugged, setting down his mug. "Gave me an excuse to spend time with you." His words hung in the air, heavy, unrelenting. My breath caught. Before I could respond, David changed the subject. "What's the plan for today?" he asked, stepping closer. I hadn't thought that far ahead. "Well," he said, leaning forward, hands braced on the back of a chair, "why don't we tackle the attic? Saw a few boxes up there yesterday. Thought maybe you could use a hand sorting through them." I hesitated, chest tightening at the thought of being in such close quarters with him, but his eager, earnest gaze made it impossible to say no. "Okay," I said softly. "Let's do it." The attic was sweltering, midday heat seeping through the roof, settling over us like a heavy blanket. Dust motes danced in beams of light streaming through the grimy window, air faintly scented with cedar and mothballs. "This is a treasure trove," David said, amusement in his voice, opening a box labeled miscellaneous. "More like a time capsule," I said, brushing hair from my face. We worked side by side, sorting through remnants of a life lived and loved. Old photo albums, faded holiday decorations, the occasional knickknack sparking a memory. David pulled out a stack of vinyl records, brow furrowed. "These are classics," he said, holding up a Fleetwood Mac album. "Michael's," I said softly, words catching in my throat. David looked at me, expression unreadable. "Do you want to keep them?" I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down. "I don't know," I admitted. "Haven't been able to let go of much. Feels like losing him all over again." David set the records aside, movement slow, deliberate. "It's not about letting go," he said gently. "It's about making room for something new." His words struck a chord and my chest tightened. We worked in silence for a while, unpacking and sorting, settling into a meditative rhythm. But the quiet didn't last. David reached for a box on the top shelf, fingers brushing against it just as the lid slipped off, a cascade of papers and mementos raining down around us. I let out a startled laugh, scrambling to help pick them up. "Sorry," he said, grinning sheepishly, crouching beside me. "It's fine," I said, shaking my head. Our hands moved in tandem, sorting through the scattered contents, until his fingers brushed against mine. The touch was brief, fleeting, but a shiver ran through me. I froze, breath catching, looking up at him. David was already watching me, expression soft, intense, his hand lingering against mine. Just a moment too long. The attic felt impossibly small, air charged, heavy. "David," I began, voice trembling. "You feel it too," he said softly, gaze unwavering. I opened my mouth to deny it, to break the moment, but words wouldn't come. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to—" He started to pull his hand away, but I stopped him. My fingers curled around his instinctively. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world outside the attic faded, leaving only the quiet rhythm of our breaths and the weight of what neither of us dared to say. The attic was silent, except for the faint creak of floorboards beneath us. My hand lingered on his, fingers trembling but resolute. For a moment, I forgot everything else. Labels, boundaries, years separating us. All I could focus on was his touch. Warmth coursing through me, his gaze holding mine, as if he could see every guarded piece of me. "I don't know what this is," I whispered, voice breaking the stillness. David's thumb brushed lightly against my hand, touch tentative but steady. "It doesn't have to be anything," he said softly. "Not right now." But it already was. I knew it, and I saw it in his eyes too. The weight of everything, his closeness, his words, unspoken tension, pressed down, leaving me breathless. I can't, I began, but words faltered. David shifted closer, knee brushing against mine. You don't have to say anything, he murmured, voice low, soothing. But I wanted to, needed to, make sense of the storm inside me. This is wrong, I said, though voice lacked conviction. Then why does it feel so right? He asked gently, eyes searching mine. I had no answer. Truth was, I didn't know. Before I could stop myself, I rose, hands slipping from his, moving to the small attic window. View outside was simple. Trees swaying, garden we'd tended, David's garden apartment. But it felt like walls closing in, space between us not physical, but overwhelming. David followed, footsteps slow, deliberate. When he stopped behind me, I felt his heat, steady presence that had always felt safe and unsettling in equal measure. Talk to me, he said softly, barely whisper. I turned, heart pounding. What do you want me to say? The truth, he said simply. The truth. Simple request, but words stuck in throat. I don't know how to, I admitted, voice trembling. David stepped closer, hands lifting, gently cupping my arms. Then let me start, he said, gaze steady. I care about you. I've always cared about you. And I don't know when it changed, but it did. And I can't pretend it didn't. Words hit like tidal wave, force unprepared for. David. I know it's complicated, he continued, voice unwavering. I know it scares you, scares me too. But I can't ignore this. I won't. Tears pricked corners of eyes. I looked away, chest tightening. You deserve more than this, more than me. That's not for you to decide, he said firmly, hands tightening on arms. You're the only one who makes me feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. His words broke something in me. Before I could stop myself, I reached up, hands resting lightly on his chest. Warmth of him, steady beat of heart beneath palms. Too much, not enough, all at once. David, this isn't fair to you, I said softly, voice trembling. What's not fair, he said, voice low, is asking me to pretend I don't feel this way when I do. His honesty, unflinching gaze, final push I didn't know I needed. I didn't realize I was moving until I felt soft press of his lips against mine. Kiss was tentative, hesitant, as if waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in, hands curling into his shirt, kiss deepening. Warmth of his touch, steady strength of arms wrapping around me, unraveled me completely. Not just a kiss, a release, a breaking of walls years in making. Every fear, doubt, rule melted away, leaving only raw, unguarded truth of what I felt. When we finally pulled apart, foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. This is crazy, I whispered, voice trembling. Maybe, David said, lips brushing mine, but it's real. His words settled like balm, soothing storm inside, even as it threatened to stir again. I don't know what happens next, I admitted, voice barely audible. Neither do I, he said softly, but we'll figure it out together. Quiet conviction in his voice, steady warmth of his gaze, enough to make me believe him. For the first time, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, we could. Morning light seeped through attic window cracks, painting room in muted hues. I sat on bed's edge, hands folded tight, air heavy, still charged with last night's emotions. Barely slept, mind replaying kiss, David's arms, his steady voice when I was teetering on doubt's edge. Emotions tangled, fear, exhilaration, guilt, hope. Soft knock at door broke through thoughts. Heart leaped, debated ignoring it, but knock came again, gentle, insistent. I rose, answered. David stood in hallway, hair tousled, eyes warm, searching. 2 steaming mugs of coffee, faintest smile playing on lips. Figured you might need this, he said softly, offering one. Thank you, I murmured, fingers brushing his as I took mug. He lingered, then nodded toward bed. Mind if I sit? Hesitated, then stepped aside, closing door behind him. David moved to bed's edge, posture relaxed, but eyes watchful, gauging every shift in my expression. I sat beside him, silence heavy, but not uncomfortable. How are you feeling? He asked, voice quiet. Shaky breath, staring into dark liquid in mug. I don't know, I admitted. Everything feels different. It is different, he said, tone steady, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. I looked at him then, chest tightening at quiet conviction in gaze. David, this isn't just about us. It's about everything. How people would see this, how they judge us, how they judge me. People will always judge, he said simply, hand resting lightly on bed between us. But they don't know you like I do. They don't see what I see. And what do you see? I asked, voice trembling. David's eyes softened. He shifted closer, hand brushing lightly against mine. I see someone who's been caring too much for too long. Someone who deserves to feel loved, to feel alive. His words unraveled me, tears welling. David, I don't know if I can do this, I said, voice breaking. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said gently, hand curling around mine. We don't have to figure everything out today or tomorrow. We'll take it one step at a time. Quiet strength in voice, warmth of touch, enough to make fear recede, if only for a moment. We spent morning talking, soft, unhurried tones. David listened as I spoke of fears, doubts, weight of past. He shared pieces of himself, hidden parts, his own struggles, longing for connection, quiet determination to find something real. By the time sun reached peak, heaviness in chest had begun to lift. Later that afternoon, we stood on porch, garden stretching out, vibrant greens and golds. David leaned against railing, arms crossed, watched breeze ripple through trees. It's beautiful, isn't it? He said, voice tinged with wonder. It is, I agreed, gaze drifting over flowers we'd planted, soft hum of life returning to a place once felt so empty. David turned to me, expression thoughtful. This feels like a beginning, he said softly. I looked at him, heart pounding. A beginning of what? He smiled, small but sure. Whatever we want it to be. His words hung in air, and for the first time I let myself believe them. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the path ahead. Not easy. Challenges, doubt, maybe regret, but for first time in years, I felt like I wasn't facing it alone. David had shown me it was okay to let go, make room for something new, unexpected. And as I drifted to sleep, quiet hope settled over me. We didn't have all the answers, but maybe we didn't need them. For now, promise of something more was enough.